and welcome to the town of Burlington's Veteran Day ceremony. In 1948, as a product of the Cold War, the Soviet Union and the United States separated the peninsula of Korea into two separate regions. Both claimed to be the legitimate government of all of Korea, and neither accepted the border as permanent. The conflict escalated into all-out warfare when North Korea crossed the 38th parallel into South Korea on June 25, 1950. On June 27th, the United Nations of the UN forces to Korea repelled what was recognized as the North Korean invasion. 21 countries of the United Nations eventually contributed to the UN forces, with the United States providing 88% of the military force. After the first 2 months of war, South Korea and the United States forces were on the point of defeat, forced back to the small area known as the Pusan Perimeter in the southeast quadrant of South Korea. In September of 1950, an all-out amphibious landing at Incheon that included soldiers, sailors, and Marines pushed back the North Korean and cut them off to the north. Those who escaped were forced back north. UN forces rapidly approached the border of China, but on October 1950, Chinese forces crossed the Yalu River and forced them back. The last 2 years of fighting became a war of attrition, with the front lines close to the 38th parallel. The fighting ended on July 27, 1953, with an armistice signed by both governments of the North and South Korea. The agreement created the Korean Demilitarized Zone to separate North and South Korea. However, no peace treaty was ever officially signed, and the two Koreas are technically still at war today, leading to continued conflict on the peninsula. Almost 327,000 Americans fought in the Korean War between 1950 and 1953. 33,686 Americans were killed in that conflict, and over 100,000 were wounded. Since then, millions have served in the Korean or on the Korean peninsula and continue to serve today. Even though the Korean War was considered relatively short compared to World War II and Vietnam, it was exceptionally bloody. Nearly 5 million people were killed. More than half of those, about 10% of the Koreans' pre-war population, were killed. This rate of the civilian casualties was higher than both World War II and Vietnam. Without the intercession of the brave men before you here today, that number would have been drastically higher. It is with great honor that we recognize those men later on this morning in our dedication to this ceremony. So now let us please all stand, and out of respect for those who have died defending the freedoms of this country, face the flag for the raising of the flag. Thank you to Rudy Porthier from the U.S. Marching Band, and please remain standing for the playing of the national anthem. may take your seats. At this time, I'd like to recognize a few individuals that are here today. I'd like to thank the Burlington High School Marching Band. I'd like to thank the service organizations, the American Legion, the VFW, the DAV, and the Marine Corps League. Also, the fire department and the police department, particularly the fire department's honor guard and the police department's honor guard. Thank you very much for being here. I'd like to recognize our elected officials. Representative Ken Gordon is here. We have all of our selectmen here, as long as the town administrator as well, and many others. Thank you for being here this morning. This morning's invocation will be given by retired Air Force chaplain major and Burlington resident Francisco Pasamonte.
Join me in prayer, please. Eternal God, our hearts are moved with a strong feeling of patriotism in beholding the flag of the United States of America and in the hearing of our national anthem. These represent a nation under God that from the days of its founding has shouted loud and clear, proclaimed liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. We are certain, O Lord, that no one has trumpeted better with a stentorian voice the message of liberty than the American veteran. On this Veterans Day, dear God, we as individuals and as a nation pay tribute to the American fighting person whose unselfish, sacrificial service has in the past and continues in the present to protect your divine gift of freedom to our great nation and to its people. Help us, O God, never to forget the price paid by the veterans of old and the uniformed men and women of the present, serving in places of danger in distant places, away from home. As they serve the cause of liberty, keep them and their families safe in your beloved and protecting hands. Indeed, O Lord, we thank you for your gift of liberty and freedom. Yes, you are the giver of this glorious gift. May we ever be mindful of the words of the third President of the United States, the Honorable Thomas Jefferson, who said, God who gave us life, gave us liberty. And can the liberties of a nation be thought secure when we have removed their only firm basis, a conviction in the minds of the people that these liberties are of the gift of God? Indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just. As we continue with the activities of this special Veterans Day, we pray, God of our fathers, that your Spirit renew us within, because we know that where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. We pray in the name of the Lord. Amen.
At this time, the band will play God Bless America. with great pleasure that I introduce our guest speaker this morning, Mr. Harry Gilligy III. Mr. Gilligy is a retired colonel from the Air Force who currently serves as the Vice Chairman of the Massachusetts Air and Space Museum. Previously, he was the Director of Personnel Services and Director of Business Development at Windmill International, Senior Associate at Booz Allen Hamilton, and Project Director of the Defense Data Network at Bolt Beranek in Newman. He retired from the Air Forces, where he held senior acquisition positions, including DCS for Personnel for Air Force Systems Command, Deputy Director for Technologies, Plans and Programs, and Program Director for the Air Force Space and Missile, Aircraft, and C4I Systems. He managed development of the B-1 F-111 engines and Titan III solid rocket motors. As Aircraft Maintenance Officer, he is responsible for the readiness and deployment of bombers, tankers, and support craft at Loring Air Force Base in Maine. Mr. Gilligy holds a Bachelor's of Science degree in Engineering Science from the University of Notre Dame, a Master's degree in System Management for the University of South California. He is also a graduate of the National War College and completed the Air Force education with industry curriculum in aeronautics and space vehicle management. He is a member of the Ancient and Honorable Artillery Company of Massachusetts and several other military, associate, and civilian organizations. I now welcome Mr. Harry Gilligy.
Well, Chris, you gave me much more than I expected there in terms of introduction. I am Buzz Gilligy. I am a resident of Western Massachusetts, and I am a veteran. The uniform you see, I'm a veteran of the Air Force, but the uniform I'm wearing is the uniform of the Ancient and Honorable Artillery Company of Massachusetts, which was founded in 1638, is the third oldest military organization in the world, behind the Swiss Guard and the Honorable Artillery Company in London, and is based down in Faneuil Hall in Boston. We're very proud to represent the U.S., the state, and the city of Boston and in our foreign travels and in the decorations throughout the world. I am proud to be a veteran. I'm proud to be a veteran every day of the year. I'm proud to be in Burlington, a town with a rich and respected tradition of military and great service to the country. I'm also proud to be on the same grounds with the veterans who served in the Korean conflict. This was a police action. Note the terminology of the action, conflict. It was a police action, even though the people were politically correct and afraid to call it a war. Yet estimates put the full battle death, as Chris has said, at millions and close to 36,000 American deaths. This conflict introduced us to the possible use of tactical nuclear weapons and the reality of the plight of POWs, prisoners of war, including brainwashing. Korea is one of the most challenging areas of the world to conduct military operations. Its frigid cold, mountain terrain, and a fierce enemy who was bolstered by the Chinese and supported by the Soviet Union, and areas that are extremely difficult to support logistically. After the U.S.'s success in World War II, our government thought it would be a short and victorious fight. It wasn't. I'm good friends with a Korean veteran and a friend of mine in the Ancients. Let's call him Jerry. He was what they called a grunt, a Marine rifleman. He was a tough kid from Chicago that joined the Marines because he believed in the fight. He tells of landing after the evacuation from the Cochin Reservoir, where our soldiers were forced down a single mountain route where hundreds were targets for Korean and Chinese marksmen in frigid conditions. Jerry endured the harshness of wet clothes and meager cave rations, while the bureaucrats on both sides tried to decide the shape of the table for the peace talks. After the talks resulted in a ceasefire, the establishment of the 38th parallel, a demilitarized zone, and Korea as a split nation, he returned home wondering why our nation was committing its young people to sacrifice for this piece of the earth. Jerry finished his tour and went to college, the same college I went to, incidentally, and became a lawyer and a CPA. And like all the veterans here in front of us, is one of the country's strongest patriots. Today we face another potential threat from Korea. Let's hope that the lessons of this conflict are remembered. We cannot predict our future action. We must depend upon the leadership of the country to assure our national security and protection of our interests. But the one thing we can count on is that we have men and women who will be the best trained and conditioned military force in the world should they be required. And when they leave the military service, they can be proud to salute and honor our flag. Thank you.
Thank you, Buzz. At this time, the commander of the Allied Veterans Council, Larry Rice, and our guest speaker, Harry Buzz, will dedicate the wreath and place it in front of our war memorial. Please stand in dedication to those who have made the ultimate sacrifice in defense of this nation. Thank you, gentlemen. You may take your seats. It is with great pleasure at this time to present the Korean Ambassador for Peace Medal to the Korean War veterans and surviving family members that you see here before you. The award has been given to these fine men from the Ministry of Patriot and Veteran Affairs of the Republic of Korea in honor of their brave service and sacrifice during the Korean War. The Consulate General of the Republic of Korea was scheduled to be here this morning to issue the award himself, but was unexpectedly called back to Korea last month, most likely due to the conflicts on the peninsula today. The Consulate General personally wrote in his letter that he could not be here, but he would like his office, He wrote that the people of Korea will always remember you as a hero who took the call to defend freedom and democracy for the Korean people. He wrote, on behalf of the government of the Republic of Korea, I warmly congratulate you for receiving this honorable medal today. Helping me hand out these awards today are U.S. Army Staff Sergeant Gary Williams and William Lahan. For the veterans here that received the award, please stand so that our community here in Burlington and abroad can recognize you for your service. I will call out your name and one of the staff sergeants will present you with the award. First on our list today is John Anderson. Mr. Anderson passed away earlier this year in April, and on behalf of Mr. Anderson, his wife Ann will be accepting the award. Mr. Anderson served in the United States Navy. Secondly, we have Mr. Paul Barrett of the United States Air Force. Mr. Joseph Bramante of the United States Army passed away in 2008. On behalf of Mr. Bramante, his wife Lucy will be accepting the award. Mr. George Curran. Unfortunately, Mr. Curran could not be here today due to his wife's illness, but we still recognize him as a hero amongst us. Mr. Curran served in the United States Air Force. Mr. Joseph Dinelli, the United States Navy. Mr. Richard Hannafin, the United States Army. Mr. Arthur Hughes, United States Navy. Unfortunately, Mr. Hughes could not be here this morning. Mr. Joseph Cohane, United States Army. Mr. William Mahoney, United States Army. Mr. John Malatesta, United States Army. Mr. John McDonald, United States Army, unfortunately could not be here this morning due to an accident that happened a few weeks ago. Mr. John Minghella, United States Army. Mr. Robert Monk, United States Army. Mr. William Morrissey, United States Marine Corps. Mr. Morrissey passed away in September of this year. His wife Barbara and daughter Bonnie will be accepting the award on his behalf. Mr. Frederick Murray, United States Army. Mr. James Reagan, the United States Navy. Unfortunately, he could not be here this morning. Mr. Charles Riley Jr., United States Army. Mr. Riley passed away in May of this year, and his granddaughter, Victoria Gonchar, will be accepting the award. Mr. Ed Sacco, United States Army. Mr. Walter Wong, United States Army. I'd like to recognize another Korean War veteran who passed away in 2013, Mr. Edward Hutchinson. And lastly, William Hurley of the United States Army. Mr. William Hurley was the only Burlington resident that was killed in action in Korea. On behalf of Mr. William Hurley, Ed Tedesco, the commander of the Burlington Disabled Veterans, will be accepting the award. And if all of you could stand now in recognition, thank you very much for your service. And please, family members, please stand as well. You may be seated. The Burlington Marching Band will play the Armed Forces Tribute. When you hear your particular service played, please stand in recognition of your service. The Burlington High School percussion section will perform Dan's Vernacular by Camille Saint-Saëns. In closing, I'd like to say that as a Marine officer, I was always told, never show your Marines weakness. Some of that meant when it was very cold that you had to put on a front that it was warm. I'm not representing my Marines here today, so I can say that it's freezing out here. And thank you so much for coming. I'd like to take this time to reflect on an enlightened moment that came to me as I was preparing my remarks. Each year I go through the previous years to make sure that I'm not covering the same thing over and over again. Last year I told personal stories of encounters of 3 World War II veterans that this job has allowed me to experience. Those 3 individuals were Mr. Harry Dern, Mr. Emery Loisel, and Mr. Peter Deckero. One of the final points that I made before we recognize the World War II veterans, that this job has allowed me to meet some real heroes. I wrote that I cherish my time with Mr. Dern, Mr. Loisel, and Mr. Deckero, and that I hope that I had many more years of stories to come. The reason why I say this is because both Mr. Dern and Mr. Loisel passed away earlier this year, which makes me think that days like this are few and far between, and that we should cherish the time that we have with our veterans, especially the World War II and Korean veterans. So it is with that that I say thank you for coming here on Veterans Day, but also thank you to the veterans that are here today. The benediction today will be given by Chaplain Passamonte.
Join me in prayer for the benediction. Father, we thank you again from the deepest chambers of our hearts. for our freedom, the liberty that we enjoy as Americans. We realize again and again that this freedom is your gift, and you have called the American veterans to protect it. So we thank you for each veteran of the past and of the present. We thank you for their families. We thank you for those civilians too who work for the cause of freedom. And now may your divine love and presence be and abide with us, not only for today, but forevermore. Bless those who are serving overseas in place of dangers, and we pray that you will keep them safe. And now as we conclude, O Lord, with this benediction, we pray, God, bless America, now and forevermore. Amen.
And lastly, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Girl Scouts and the Boy Scouts for being here and participating. For everybody else that participated, I'd also like to thank Selectmen Joe Morandi and Chris Hartling for helping me set up this morning, along with Jen, the Administrative Assistant to the Veterans Office, Rich Reed from the cemetery, who was here at 8 o'clock this morning setting up the generator. Thank you very much for your service here this morning. I would like to say that thank you very much to the Korean War veterans and their families for coming out here today. So thank you. I'd like to thank Steve Doyle, who works at the Human Services Building. He was here at 8 o'clock this morning setting up all the chairs too. So Steve, thank you very much. And to anybody that I may have forgotten, I apologize. You can talk to me afterwards. So at this time, commanders, take charge of your troops and carry out the plan of the day. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our veteran services. The American Legion will be holding a light brunch immediately following the service. Have a happy Veterans Day and God bless.
Right now.